I want you all to think of the most hysteria you've ever seen in a single place at one time.
Mass hysteria!
For older generations, it may have been the Cuban Missile Crisis. For younger people, perhaps you remember the stock market crash of '08. Depending on your political leanings, it may have been the election of Donald Trump.
Enough, I get the point!
For me, it was working at a gift shop with Baphomet paraphernalia and Crazy Karen stomping her feet and screaming accusations that I was a devil worshipper. Given that I come from an area of the country rife with religious conservatism, neither she nor the small crowd of religion nuts who gathered behind her were very interested in my explanation as to why these two entities are entirely different. That's what I have you lovely, open-minded people for. However, if you're hoping that Baphomet is some long-forgotten Mesopotamian god or has any basis in writing or something a little more substantial than the aftertaste of religious fear-mongering after a healthy spoonful of political discourse shoved down your throat, I'd hate to say that you'd be disappointed. Baphomet stinks to high heaven, and that's because it is a purely fictitious French icon dating back to the Middle Ages, where soap was almost as high a commodity to come by as literacy. And these guys unfortunately never discovered the former. So, back in those days, when Palestine was but a mere glimmer in the Muslim Caliphate's collective ballsack, a certain Holy Land was being fought over by two certain factions which are the descendants of that one other religion they quickly determined didn't have a horse in that race. It was a tiny, inconsequential thing called the First Crusade. You may have heard of it if you bothered to look through the footnotes of your American high school history books. At least that sums up the entirety of my education, shy of literally skipping ahead straight to the World Wars. Oh wait, wrong picture. Oh no. Anyway, that horrible oversimplification aside, the First Crusade, and specifically the massively bloated Catholic Church of the time, serves as our backdrop to today's video. We find our first mention of Baphomet as the troubadour disambiguation of the prophet Muhammad during the siege of Antioch. See, at that time, the old French term Mahomet, which is a bit closer in line with the correct pronunciation, was commonly used, but for one reason or another. Anselm of Ribebont, a veteran of the siege, wrote, "As the next day dawned, they called loudly upon Baphomet, and we prayed silently in our hearts to God." Another misconception of the time was that the Muslims believed in the use of idol worship, more specifically of severed heads. There is no surviving evidence to support this, but I'm going to ask you all to put a pin in that one as we'll be coming back to it later. For the meantime, keep in mind that Baphomet is Muhammad, at least as far as the medieval Christendom is concerned, and what better way to label your political rivals as heretics than to accuse them of idol worship and subterfuge of the church via fraternization with the enemy of your god. What I am referring to is the accusation of King Philip IV against the Knights Templar in 1307. It is a long and complicated story which has warranted the simultaneous release of an entirely separate video on my second channel, Messiahs in History. Oh look, there's a link to it. I'd say go and watch it with this one on pause until you get back, but no, you essentially have to watch it. It's pretty much required viewing in order to continue watching this video, so please follow that link in the right hand corner or in the description, because I think you are really going to be lost without it for context. I'll give you a few seconds to launch it and pause this video. 3, 2, 1... Okay, so dickhead Philip IV launched what amounted to an illegal inquisition against the order, eliciting false confessions out of them.
Inquisition.
And since I purposely skipped this in my Fall of the Templars video, let's start going over those accusations of idol worship. So, the French court's official trial was based on the supposed practice that the brothers had a blessed rope which they tied around, quote, an idol in the form of a man's head with a large beard, which head they would kiss and worship in their provisional chapters. Curiously enough though, during the official hearing by the French court, neither James of Malay nor Geoffrey Charney were questioned about the idol, and instead they withheld their questions on that matter until they got to their star witness, Hugh of Peyraud, a brother who served nearly 44 years in the order, and who you may recall was the one who changed his story in the middle of the hearing after a convenient recess, throwing all of his brothers under the metaphorical bus as he did so. When asked about the idol, Hugh described a bejeweled head of a man on 4 feet in Montpellier, which he worshipped with his lips and not his heart. Whether or not that means he simply praised it with empty words or was made to kiss the idol like the new initiates into the order is pretty unclear. What is clear is that the description of the head being jewel-encrusted is actually sourced from a perfectly Catholic tradition of placing a saint's ashes into a similar box called a reliquary. Whether or not this was to lighten the load of it being a purely pagan practice by comparison to the Christian tradition is again unclear. But Hugh seems like the kind of trustworthy Nigerian prince you can leave all of your credit card information with, so he must be telling the truth. Next up is Stephen of Troyes, who reiterated that the idol was a bedazzled head, though curiously did not name it Mammon as might be expected. He claimed that the head was actually an effigy of Hugh of Pains, a founder of the order itself. Given how corrupt and exploitative the order was from its very inception, I can totally see egomania being a part of their modus operandi. Afterwards, we get a few more confessions, all disclosing different and, in many cases, contrary details. One brother attested that the idol had horns, another claimed that it was a literal severed head, and one went so far as to state that the idol had 3 faces, which is... I'd like to believe that this description was the inspiration behind Dante's depiction of Satan, though there's never any real evidence of that being the case. But if it is, it's really cool, and I do love referential shit like this. Alas, the only thing consistent about this idol is that it's supposed to be a head of some sort, which I'd like to remind you was a part of the original allegation and was a long-standing rumor at the time, primarily focused around the alien Islamic world. However, there is a sort of fringe theory proposed by those who claim that the Knights Templars' confessions were not at all coerced, and that all of the sodomy, kissing, cross-trampling, and whatnot is totally real, but that's all excusable since they were all Gnostics. The kissing of certain areas was supposedly connected to various yoga practices from the East, the trampling of the cross was a protest against its use as a torture device, and sodomy is apparently just okay. Their justification for this one is really weak. However, there is a tradition in the Jonanite Gnostics that John the Baptist, not Yeshua ben Joseph, was the Messiah, and that the Templars supposedly recovered his mummified head during their 4th Crusade raid on Constantinople. So, fuck off, you culturally insensitive asshats. They were merely worshipping the Messiah's severed head, just like I've instructed my death cult to do after my passing. Well, I mean, that's a nice theory. Doesn't excuse the fact that this organization would still be committing heresy in the eyes of the Catholic Church, let alone the French government. But then there's also the testament of Stephen of Troyes that this head was emblematic of Hugh of Pains, not to mention most of the other confessions of idol worship, which I would like to remind you were collected after months of torture and starvation, specifically named the idol Baphomet. And the crux of the Gnostic argumentation is based off the Chinon parchment, a document backed by the clergy wherein James of Malay, after telling a church representative that the accusations against him were bullshit, flip-flopped on his previous position at the prospect of being pardoned for his heresy by confessing and repenting for his actions. It was a sort of plea deal where James would guarantee the survival of the order and cut out all the bureaucratic bullshit that the French government was trying to put on him. Nowhere in this supposed confession does James admit that the actions of the Templars were motivated by Gnosticism, and really claiming that the Chinon parchment is the end-all be-all of the Templars' guilt is retarded, since the clergy had actually demanded that the Templars would stand formal trial for their heresy after this document was written up, since good old Philip here had decided to barbecue most of the scheduled witnesses because supposedly he had already ascertained their guilt. Remember how I said that there are no heroes in this story? Stop trying to make the Templars sympathetic. They were just as crooked as the French monarchy and had more than enough reason to say whatever they needed in order to make all of this go away. Your Gnosticism theory is crap and it belongs where it came from. Up your ass. But hey, you can rest easy knowing that it had made a footnote on the main channel, so good for you, I guess.
Oh, good for you!
Anyways, as I previously stated, Baphomet was used as a proper noun for the first time in these proceedings, something almost certainly conjured up by the French. However, the idol of a human head with various amounts of feet connected to its body was the form of this deity all the way up until 1854, where the concept was dug up by the occultist Eliphas Levi and received a top-to-bottom redesign, becoming the sabbatic goat we're all familiar with today. So, taking this apart piece by piece, the candle between the goat's horns is meant to be a callback to the witch's Sabbath, whom Eliphas believed to be just practicing some form of paganism. A goat with a candle between its horns appears in medieval records relating to the occult, which is also where the pentagram on Eliphas's goat comes from, as before the symbol came to be bastardized as a symbol of devil worshipping, it was a Celtic symbol discerning light. The rest of the imagery is basically a balancing act between two oppositional forces molded into a perfect being who, in Eliphas's mind, best represents the concept of God. So, let's start with them milkers. And then the fact that kinda sorta has a penis. These are meant to be representative of Baphomet's androgyny, which is also supposed to extend out to his arms, with one being male and the other one female, though that one is a bit hard to discern. You'll also notice that the penis in this case is substituted for a caduceus, which is supposed to represent eternal life due to the staff's reported ties to the Greek medicinal god Asclepius, who could reportedly raise the dead. It's also, in of itself, a symbol of balance, later transcribed as a symbol of negotiation. There's also a balance in the taking of the pre-established goat, an animal bound to the earth, giving it wings so that it can transcend into the atmosphere, and also scales on its waist so that it can survive in aquatic environments. Supposedly. This thing is also pointing upwards and downwards simultaneously, towards two moons, representative of the Chesed, the Hebrew word for love, and Geburah, roughly meaning justice, interpreted as meaning that the two can exist simultaneously. Looking a bit more closely, one can see the word solve on his right arm, and coagula on his left. This is a motto of alchemy meaning to dissolve and to coagulate, interpreted as both a continuation of this new Baphomet's theme of duality, and also to dissolve the body to build up the spirit, or some fortune cookie nonsense like that. Yeah, look, I get that it's supposed to be a really insightful, thought-provoking idol, but I see this thing and all I can think of is the r/atheism cringe. Eliphas was a very edgy boy, and that's not just apparent by being very anti-Christianity to the point of purposely picking two deliberately satanic symbols to compose this thing's composite form. Not to mention all the things on here which would be considered obscene at best and blasphemous at worst. But also in his methodology by which he picked the name Baphomet. Yes, we confront here that the phantom of all terrors, the dragon of all theogonies, the Ahriman of the Persians, the Typhon of the Egyptians, and the Python of the Greeks, this old serpent of the Hebrews, the fantastic monster, the nightmare, the fuck that word, the gargoyle, the great beast of the medieval ages, and worse than all of these, the Baphomet of the Templars, the bearded idol of the alchemist, the obscene deity of Mendes, the goat of the Sabbath. The front piece to this ritual reproduces the exact figure of the terrible Emperor of Night, which all his attributes and all of his characters. Yes, in our profound conviction, the Grand Masters of the Order of the Templars worship the Baphomet and caused it to be worshipped by their initiates. Oh, is this accent not obnoxiously French? So, not only does Eliphas attribute all of these mythological antagonists together with all the reverence of a 12-year-old boy for Shadow the Hedgehog, but he definitively accuses the Templars of being some sort of devil-worshipping cult rather than a bunch of, admittedly, scummy human beings who were strong-armed into giving a false confession by the French. There are very few hills I would die on in this life, but this is one of them. If this obvious truth offends your sensibilities, you're on the wrong channel. Though, if you've been watching up to this point, your view has already been counted towards this video, so you've helped me out either way. Moving on to another edgy boy, we have Alist, whose name is more or less tied to Baphomet's name, like a special needs kid on a field trip to a teacher's wrist.
You faggot.
A bit undeservedly, though, I must say. His entire contribution to the Baphomet mythos is definitively tying the name to that of Satan and a tirade on Satan good, and also made a statement cementing that whole opposites convening thing I mentioned before about Alist's design of Baphomet, which a literal 5-year-old could pick up on. Even then, Crowley wasn't the first to definitively say that Baphomet is Satan. I mean, that's kind of heavily implied anyway, by its edgelord design, but do you ever wonder why it is that Baphomet has such strong ties to Freemasonry? Well, both connections point back to this man, Leo Taxil, who prominently featured Baphomet on the cover of his book, Les Mystères de la Franc-Maçonnerie dévoilés. Yeah, I can't fucking speak French to save my life. This book was published in 1885 and served as a public takedown of the Freemasons, attesting that they too partook in idol worship and served the demon Baphomet's will. Until 1897, where he confessed that the whole thing was a scam, which seems to be a little inkling that conspiracy theorists who absolutely attest it to be true seem to have missed. Oh well, I'm sure this video will help alleviate those rumors, and I definitely won't be getting any sort of angry comments about how I'm a shill for the Freemasons or how I misrepresented Daddy. At the end of the day, Baphomet is, and has always been, a weapon of sorts. He started out his career as Muhammad, enemy of the Christian world, then was used against the Knights Templar to go and charge them with heresy, then was redesigned to be literally the most offensive thing ever to the prudish Christian sensibilities, and to this day continues to be just as obnoxious. In fact, as recently as 2014, the Satanic Temple commissioned an 8.5-foot statue of Baphomet, and then intentionally placed it next to the monument of the Ten Commandments at the Oklahoma State Capitol. After predictable public outcry, the Supreme Court of Oklahoma outlawed any displays of religious statues in a public venture. Then, in 2018, after yet another monument to the Ten Commandments was erected in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Satanist church rolled up yet again, cracking out the statue and publicly demonstrating in front of the monument because other people's religions are so offensive. Anyway, the state had a law on the books that you can't display any monument not legislatively sponsored, to which the totally not vice-signaling, insecure Satanist church threatened to sue the state for religious discrimination, and even tried to hop onto a previous case that the ACLU tried to put on this state, only for the ACLU, literally the most liberal organization shy of the SPLC, to reject them and ask the court to bar them from their case. Literal fucking man-children. And that's about all I have to say on Baphomet. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Be sure to subscribe for more content in the future, and if you really like what I do here, you can follow the link in the description to support me on Patreon, like these names over here. Also, please remember to like the video. It takes literally half a second for you, but for me and this shitty algorithm, it really does make a world of difference. Don't forget about that companion video. Link is still down below if you haven't seen it yet. I would say it's absolutely required viewing in order to fully digest today's video, so I don't know how the hell you made it this far without seeing it. But go ahead and rectify that as soon as you get the chance. We've got one more mythological character study lined up on the antagonists of the Bible, so stay tuned for that one, and until next time, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, my name is Messiahs in Mythology, and I hope you all have a God's blessed day.